The waiter froze as if turned to stone when little Lena, the daughter of Grant Palermo, the most powerful mob boss in the Northeast, suddenly collapsed right there at the dinner table. Her eyes rolled back. Her lips had gone a bluish pallor, and her breath came in stuttering, uneven bursts, while the poison crept silently into her bloodstream. In that instant, the dining room dissolved into pure chaos. Shouts filled the air. Chairs toppled. Family members rushed toward her, but amid the tumult, there was only one figure whose calm was so uncanny it chilled the room: Frank Marzano, Grant's close advisor. His gaze did not show alarm. It was an observing, waiting gaze, as if he had anticipated this moment. Anna Walsh, the Guatemalan housekeeper, stood in the corner of the room, her hands clenched on the tablecloth, her heart hammering like a war drum. She had no right to speak up, no place in that family beyond clearing plates and pouring wine. Yet she had seen far too much of what others chose to ignore. When Frank quietly took a step back instead of lunging to save Lena, Anna knew something was wrong. No one paid attention to her, and that invisibility had kept her alive for 3 years. But this time, that very invisibility pushed her toward the most consequential decision of her life. That night, Anna slipped into Grant's study and opened the safe using Lena's birth date, the 23rd of September, and took $2 million in cash before vanishing into the dark. She crossed several states and ended up in Arizona, where she sought out the antidote recipe from those whom Palermo had once declared he would kill without question. Anna was neither a spy nor a heroine. She was simply a woman who could not stand by and watch a child die in front of her while the traitor walked freely through the house. She had no idea that her reckless act would forever alter her position within that empire, that saving Lena would make her the most dangerous woman in the entire Palermo clan. Before that fateful night, Anna had been a nameless shadow. But after Lena's fall, everything changed. And this story, which began with what seemed an ordinary dinner, became one of the most whispered secrets in American Mafia circles. If your heart is still racing from what happened at the Palermo house, do not forget to subscribe to the channel Underworld Love Stories. Hit like and share so you do not miss these breathless tales where loyalty, betrayal, and mercy collide in a world of darkness and power. Each day we tell stories like this, about small people who dare to stand up inside a giant empire, about choices that redirect destinies forever. If you are listening from somewhere, or from a quiet place late at night, comment where you are hearing this, so we know how far this tale has traveled, because sometimes a single person brave enough to act is enough to change an empire. Anna stood rooted in the open kitchen, where she could see the dining room through the glass. When the Palermo family's private doctor rushed in carrying a black medical case, Anna still could not take her eyes off the almond cream sauce on the plate. Something about that scent was off. As a longtime housekeeper, she had tasted hundreds of dishes in this mansion, and almond sauce always had a sweet, subtly rich aroma. But tonight, as the last spoonful was ladled into Lena's portion, Anna noticed a harsher, sharper odor, an almond gone rotten, sour and acrid, and it made her recoil. Yet nobody suspected a thing. The chef had prepared this dish dozens of times. Everyone assumed it was an ordinary evening. Only Anna stood motionless, eyes wide as Lena began to gasp and slump forward, spoon and fork clattering to the floor with a cold metallic sound. Her gaze then landed on Frank Marzano, the man whose face had been impassive as stone for the last 3 years. While others leapt up and ran to Lena, frantically calling for the doctor, Frank merely lifted his wineglass, drank a small sip, and set it back down with a deliberate coldness. His gesture was too composed, too calculated. In the dim light, Anna saw that his look was not confusion or fear, but a kind of waiting, a callous expectance, as if he knew what was happening, or had caused it. Anna's heart pounded, and her mind began to stitch together fragments of memory. She remembered the night before when Frank had come to the kitchen earlier than usual and discussed with the chef about changing the flavor profile for the special dinner. She remembered that Frank was the only person who always knew where Lena would sit because he arranged the seating. And tonight, the almond sauce, which was not a regular menu item, had been placed exactly on Lena's plate. Anna could not speak, could not accuse, could not step into the center of that room and point at Frank. Yet within her a truth began to form. A cold ran down her spine as Lena was carried upstairs with Grant's face gone ashen following the doctor, while Frank kept his hands clasped behind his back, watching as if observing the results of an experiment. Anna understood that if she did nothing, Lena would die, and if her suspicion was correct, the mastermind stood not beyond the circle but in the person closest to the boss. A nameless feeling flared up inside Anna, half terror and half an overwhelming urge to save the child. She looked around the vast mansion where she was normally invisible, but for the first time in her life she did not feel powerless. She felt she saw more clearly than anyone present, and she knew that tonight she must do the unthinkable. She would save Lena even if it meant becoming the enemy of the entire Palermo Empire. The clatter of the medical case wheels echoed urgently down the marble corridor as Dr. Resuscitation, Paul Harwood, stormed into the room like a gust of wind. He had been the Palermo family's private physician for 15 years. A man who had handled everything from stray bullets to alcohol poisoning. Yet he had never seen Grant's face so seized by panic. Lena lay motionless on the dark brown leather sofa, her skin as pale as paper, her lips a deep bruise of purple, her limbs twitching faintly. Grant knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he clasped the tiny hand that was growing colder by the second, his eyes a portrait of terror so at odds with his usual mantle of power. Lena was all that remained of the marriage he had lost. The single hope that kept something human alive in him after so many years in a world of blood and dominion. Grant had never prepared himself to lose that. Paul hurriedly fitted an oxygen tube, checked the pulse, shone a flashlight into the child's eyes, and drew a blood sample. After several unbearably tense minutes, he lifted his head, shook it slightly, and spoke in a hoarse voice. This was not an ordinary food allergy. The rapid pupil constriction, the abrupt drop in heart rate, the mottled purple blotches on the skin, and the twitching of the mouth muscles pointed to a reaction from a very potent neurotoxin, one capable of paralyzing the respiratory system within minutes, if not treated correctly. Paul had never encountered a toxin that reacted this quickly in all his medical years. He ordered immediate intravenous fluids, cardiac stabilizers, and to have adrenaline and a defibrillator ready. But he also confessed he did not know precisely what the agent was. Grant sprang up, his eyes like burning coals. Sweeping the room that only minutes before had been filled with a warm dinner, he shouted who prepared the meal, who served the plates, who sat next to Lena, who touched her glass. All gazes turned toward the kitchen, where the head chef was ashen, shaking, a towel still clutched in his hand stained with cream sauce. Frank stepped up to Grant, laid a steady hand on his shoulder and, striving to keep his voice calm and composed as always, said let him handle it. Let him question people one by one. Suggested it could be a storage error or sabotage from within. But Grant's eyes flashed suspicion for a brief instant. A look Anna caught. She stood behind the door, watching every detail like an invisible shadow. She saw plainly that Frank showed no anxiety, even as Lena convulsed and broke out in cold sweat. He remained with his arms folded, his face unreadable. While Paul continued his work upstairs, Grant retreated to his study and slammed the door so forcefully the sound reverberated through the mansion. He phoned the 3 men closest to him, ordered the main gate locked, all security cameras disabled for 12 hours, and demanded that everyone in the house be quarantined. No one permitted to leave until they knew exactly what had happened. To him, this was not merely a poisoning but an assault on the very heart of his power. Upstairs, Paul whispered to the nurse that there was only one place that could definitively identify the substance, the toxicology laboratory in Tempe, Arizona, the facility that specialized in analyzing unregistered chemical agents. But time was running out. Anna heard that and felt an alarm bell ring inside her. The pieces were clicking into place. Frank knew the system intimately. He knew Lena's routines. He knew the kitchen. She had no proof, no position from which to speak the truth. Yet she had a hunch, and the instincts of someone who had lived a lifetime in the shadows rarely lied. Lena could die at any moment, and if nobody acted, she would be the first victim, and perhaps not the last. It was late, and the Palermo mansion lay wrapped in an atmosphere so heavy it felt suffocating. The ground floor hushed, save for a few dim amber lights spilling down the corridor that led to Grant's study. Upstairs, Dr. Percent, Harwood still kept vigil at Lena's side. His face so taut the lines seemed to carve deeper with every passing minute. Anna stood in the dark kitchen, drying the last glass as an excuse to linger, waiting until the guard's patrol footsteps fell silent before slipping out of the kitchen and threading her way down the hallway toward Frank Marzano's office. A teak door bolted shut, and chilling as the man himself, she had cleaned this room dozens of times and knew the place by touch where each object lived. Which drawer stuck? What scraps of paper were likely to be shoved behind a folder? But tonight she did not come to tidy. She came for the truth. Beneath the faint desk lamp, she eased her hand into the narrow gap of the right-hand file drawer, where she had once seen Frank hide folders that never reached anyone else. There was a soft click as a tiny catch released, and she pulled the drawer open, her heart ratcheting when she saw a thick bundle of documents wrapped in pale gray plastic with no name. She opened it and leafed through the pages. Alien scientific terms made her head swim. But one line froze her. TX-47, a new generation neurotoxin. Odorless. Tasteless. Reacts within 2 to 5 minutes after exposure. Beneath it sat the logo of a company she had never heard of. Clearwell Chemical Holdings Tempe, Arizona. She read on, eyes skimming the details. This agent was in illegal experimental stages, not approved by the United States government. Only a minute quantity had leaked into the black market, and it was typically used in assassinations that left no trace. The most chilling note was on the last page, handwritten in blue ink in a hand she found disturbingly familiar. A low dose may cause convulsions and coma, but used at the correct quantity within the final 30 seconds before ingestion, effectiveness doubles. Underneath the note was a scanned invoice. Anna barely breathed when she saw the recipient's name. F. Marzano. It was as if cold water had been poured down her back. Frank had ordered the toxin, and he knew precisely how to use it. There could be no doubt. Lena had been poisoned by the very man her father trusted without question. She turned a few more pages and found another document. A schematic of the house's security cameras with the kitchen and the cold storage marked in red. And a small handwritten line. Change camera positions 30 minutes before dinner. The pieces slotted together with a terrible clarity. Frank had planned this for some time, even tampering with surveillance so no one would see him in the kitchen. Anna folded the files back exactly as she had found them and slid them into place, then retreated swiftly, her heart pounding like a drum, but her mind sharper than it had ever been. She had the answer. Yet another truth loomed. No one in that house would trust the word of an anonymous housekeeper. And no one would believe that Frank, the man who had saved Grant's life twice, could be a traitor. If she exposed this evidence, she might be silenced forever. If she stayed silent, Lena might not survive the night. And even if the child lived there, would be more victims to come. Anna returned to her room and sat by the window looking out over the black garden. A cold night wind slid through the curtains, carrying a deeper unease. Yet in that darkness, an idea began to take shape. She would not report this. She would not beg anyone to believe her. She would find the antidote herself. And to do that, she would have to steal what no one dared touch. Grant Palermo's safe. Anna's room was at the far end of the ground floor corridor, a quiet wing reserved for the household staff. She sat on an old wooden chair by the window, the weak glow from a night lamp barely piercing the darkness that filled her mind. The dossier she had read replayed itself in her memory, every line. Every handwritten note in Frank's familiar scrawl, and the image of Lena lying motionless upstairs, clenched her throat tight. Doctor Harwood had done everything he could. Yet even he had admitted there was no antidote in his reach. Only one place that could help, the laboratory of Clearwell Chemical in Arizona. But how could she, a servant, contact a facility run by people who dealt in danger? She could not walk out of the Palermo gates without reason. Nor could she appeal to Grant or reveal the truth while the evidence still sat locked in Frank's drawer. She had only one choice left, to obtain the antidote herself. And to do that, she needed money, not hundreds, not thousands, but enough to make anyone in the underworld listen. She thought of Grant Palermo's safe hidden behind a large oil painting in his office, a dull still life no one paid attention to. She had dusted that frame hundreds of times, and once, only once, she had seen him open the safe, entering a code while speaking softly to Lena. his voice uncharacteristically tender. It had been the girl's birthday. The 23rd of September. Anna never forgot that look in his eyes. The rare gentleness that stripped away his usual steel. She closed her own eyes and whispered the numbers in her mind. 2, 0, 2, 3. That was the code. She was certain. All she had to do now was wait for the right moment. By 3 in the morning, the mansion was steeped in absolute silence. Barefoot, she moved across the wooden floor with the soundless care of a breath. The guards had changed shifts and were lax at this hour. Anna crept down the long corridor to the study and tried the handle. Unlocked. She pushed the door open, slipped inside without switching on the light. The faint glow from the hall was enough to reveal the painting hanging slightly askew behind the desk. She eased it aside, exposing a black electronic safe. Her hands trembled as she keyed in the digits 2, 0, 2, 3. A click broke the silence. The door swung open. Inside were 3 stacks of cash bound tight, each as thick as a dictionary. There was also a small handgun in a velvet box, and several documents she didn't stop to read. She needed only the money. She took 2 stacks, slid them into the cloth bag she had prepared, shut the safe, straightened the painting, and slipped out as quietly as she had entered. Back in her room, she hid the money beneath the false bottom of her worn suitcase, covered it with a few old clothes and a small Bible her mother had given her back home. She had no idea whom she would meet, or whether they would help her or kill her. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. If she did nothing, Lena would die. And if Lena died, no one in that house would be able to stop Frank's plans from advancing. 6 years of serving the wealthy had taught Anna one truth, that sometimes survival depends on the actions of those no one notices. She stepped out of her room carrying the suitcase and a burning resolve. When the mansion gates closed behind her, she did not look back. She knew there was no return. She had just stolen $2 million from a Mafia boss, and all of it was to save a child who shared no blood with her. But to Anna, it was not theft. It was a choice. And that night, she became something no one ever expected. A woman willing to risk everything to do what was right. The night bus from New York to Arizona took nearly 38 hours, crossing 8 states, passing through fog-shrouded cities and stretches of barren land stripped of human presence. Anna sat alone in the very last row, her bag pressed against her leg, her hand never leaving the handle of the worn suitcase that carried $2 million and what little faith she had left. She ate nothing but a few crackers and sips of bottled water from the first rest stop. She dared not sleep long, afraid someone might touch her luggage. She spoke to no one, fearing that even a single careless word could bring everything down. Throughout the endless journey, she thought only of Lena and of Grant's desperate eyes as he cradled his daughter. That image was the only thing that kept her from breaking. The sun set and rose again, the horizon shifting from pine forests to red desert. And by the 3rd morning, Anna arrived in Tempe, Arizona. Nothing greeted her but blinding sunlight and waves of heat rising from the asphalt. The city was unlike any she had known, industrial, yet old, carrying the uneasy stillness of a place that hid too many secrets behind nameless concrete walls. She hailed a cab to the address she had memorized from the files. The building was 3 stories high, its dark glass facade standing at the end of a quiet industrial complex, with no visible sign except for a faint sticker by the door that read, Clearwell Chemical Holdings. Anna stepped inside, her heartbeat quickening. The lobby was deserted, filled only with the soft hum of an air conditioner and the sterile glow of fluorescent lights. A middle-aged man in a white shirt and black tie emerged from a side door, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. He did not introduce himself, only studied her with cautious detachment. She knew this was no ordinary company, and he was no receptionist. Anna lifted her chin. Hesitation gone. She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket, scrawled 3 letters, TX 47, and a number, 2 million. Then she folded it and handed it to him without a word. The man looked at the note, expression unreadable, then motioned for her to follow. They walked down a narrow corridor and entered a small windowless conference room. On the table sat a laptop, a metal box, and 2 chairs. He sat down, typed something, and turned the screen toward her. On it was a molecular diagram of TX-47. Its full name, tetrachlorovinyl neurotoxin. Beneath it were details on dosage, reaction time, how it spread through the body, and the one thing Anna had come for: the name of the antidote, antivenin V7. It was not commercially available, not legally distributed, existing only within an internal research network. The man spoke briefly. "Buy the medicine or the formula?" Anna answered. "The formula." He nodded, opened the metal box, took out a small silver USB drive, and placed it on the table with a flat voice. "One way. No refunds." Anna nodded, pulled her bag closer, unzipped it, and took out 2 stacks of cash. Setting them down without a tremor, the man checked the bills, nodded once, and slid the USB toward her. She picked it up, rose from her chair, and left without another word. When she stepped outside, the sunlight scorched her skin, but inside she felt only a deep, freezing cold. She had just made a deal with a corner of the world where a single wrong step meant vanishing without a trace, but she had what she came for: a sliver of hope encased in metal. And now she had to make it back to New York before it was too late. Lena was still lying between life and death, and only Anna knew the way back to salvation. The USB felt ice cold in Anna's palm as she stepped away from the Clearwell building. Yet she knew she could not simply walk away. Something was off. The man who had handed her the device containing the antidote formula had not asked her name, had not run a background check, had not required verification. Everything had been unnervingly smooth for a stranger arriving from out of town, carrying a cloth bag with $2 million on her arm. And that very ease set every alarm ringing in her head. As she rounded the industrial block, her fear turned to reality. A black sport utility vehicle pulled up and blocked her path with a screech, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out, their eyes naked threats. The shorter man came forward and spoke in a rasp as though he had smoked 100 packs. "Who are you? Who sent you? We do not deal with strangers." Anna swallowed, fingers tightening on the bag strap. She had no weapon, no ally, but she did have the single thing that might save her now: the name Grant Palermo. She raised her chin, met the man's gaze, and spoke in an even, measured voice, word by word. "I am with the Palermo household. He sent me." Both men froze for the brief space of half a second. That name, even here in Arizona, carried weight. The taller man sized her up from head to toe, a half smile of doubt lifting one corner of his mouth. "Palermo's people are never women, and certainly not small like you." Anna did not look away. If she showed fear, they would swallow her whole. She stepped forward, drew from an inner pocket a scrap of paper with a bank account number she had seen in Frank's file and, at the bottom, an internal code, the transaction authentication used for dealings with the black market. And she held the scrap up before them, Grant's code from a transaction 2 weeks earlier. "If I'm a fake, how did I get this?" The 2 men glanced at one another. The shorter snatched the paper, checked it for a few seconds, and then took a step back, the other speaking slowly. "So you're Frank's." In that instant, Anna understood she stood between 2 hidden powers: one the Palermo clan, the other the rival suppliers of the toxin. She could not reveal herself as someone betraying Frank. She only nodded and kept her voice steady. "I was sent by Frank. Personally. There is no time for procedure. His daughter has been poisoned. By the substance you make. We need the antidote." The man studied her, then stepped back and said next time Frank should come himself. "We don't like dealing with outsiders. And you are reckless." Before signaling his companion to withdraw, the SUV rolled away into a cloud of red dust. Anna stood there for a long minute, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it in her throat. Never had she lied like that. Never had she faced men like those face to face. Yet by some impossible reckoning, she had passed them by careful observation, by an infallible memory, and by a recklessness only those with nothing left to lose dare summon. She checked the USB in her pocket, hailed a taxi to the nearest bus station, and left, knowing time was a dwindling thing. If they stopped her again, no one could save her. But for now, she had achieved the unthinkable: an anonymous housekeeper, armed only with her wits and courage, had walked into the lair of chemical traffickers, deceived merchants of death, and returned with the one thing that might save Lena Palermo. And even then, it was only the beginning. The battered taxi rolled away from the industrial park, leaving behind Anna a veil of dust that dimmed the fading desert light. But instead of heading straight to the bus depot as she had planned, she asked the driver to pull into a roadside cafe where the weak Wi-Fi might be enough for the laptop she had bought hastily at a nearby electronics store. She sat by the window, her eyes constantly scanning the room for anyone who might be following her. And the small silver USB lay in her palm like a living thing. Not merely a device, but a promise. The slender thread of life, for Lena and for Anna herself. She plugged the device into the laptop, and a trove of encrypted files flickered onto the screen. She opened folder after folder until she stopped at a file named V7 Protocol, which revealed a detailed scientific dossier describing the molecular structure of TX-47, how it paralyzed the nervous system, and the only method of antidote known. Yet what chilled her more than the formula was the final note. The V7 compound has not been tested on humans. Dosage beyond thresholds may cause anaphylactic shock or death. Use only under special medical supervision. With no other option, Anna downloaded the file, copied it onto another drive as a backup, and immediately logged into an anonymous messaging system she knew. She had to force them to confirm the efficacy of the formula in a way even Frank had not managed, so she created an anonymous account and sent an email to the address in the one. Metadata attaching the copied protocol with a terse ultimatum. If this is a fake, I will release the entire dossier to the press and federal agencies. And if no confirmation arrives within 1 hour, the copy will be disseminated. Less than 15 minutes later, a reply appeared. Cold and emotionless. This is the only copy. Tested on animals. High success rate. Must not leak. We are not responsible if exposed. Anna exhaled. It was all she needed. An acknowledgement. However vague. Better than silence. She spent a few more minutes extracting the entire dataset onto a small memory card and tucked it deep into her bra for safekeeping. Placed the original USB back into its metal box. Wrapped it in tissue and shoved it to the bottom of her handbag. Each move calculated so that if she were caught, she would at least retain the copy. When night fully fell, Anna boarded the night coach out of Tempe, bound for New York. And this time she did not sleep. She did not allow herself a single moment of laxity, because in the pocket near her heart lay something men like Frank might kill for. And if he learned she had it, not only Lena would be in danger, but she herself would have no chance to disappear. But Anna did not feel fear now. Not this time. She had come too far and had walked into a place no one expected. And above all, she possessed what the Palermo clan could not buy with any sum of money. She had the antidote. And she was ready to do whatever it took to get it to where it was needed most. The last bus carried Anna back to the outskirts of New York at 3 a.m, when mist still clung to the windows and the city slept beneath a heavy silence. She stepped down, the strap of her cloth bag cutting into her shoulder. Its weight filled with the memory card holding the antidote, the original USB, and a few wrinkled clothes still dusted from the road. Each step toward the Palermo gates pressed deeper into her bones, as if the air itself had grown heavier. She imagined handing the antidote to Dr. Bate, Harwood, seeing Lena open her eyes, watching Grant collapse into his chair with relief. But as she reached the marble steps of the front entrance, 2 shadows lunged from either side. They said nothing, only seized her arms and forced her to the cold stone floor. Her bag was ripped away, its contents scattering. Before she could scream, a cloth was jammed over her mouth, her head pinned down, headlights glaring in her eyes. A voice she knew cut through the silence, low, composed, and sharp as steel. Frank Marzano, you thought you could disappear for nearly 48 hours and come back as if nothing happened? You thought I wouldn't know what you took from the safe? You thought I wouldn't track you? Anna? She struggled, but the 2 men held her like hunters restraining prey. Frank stepped forward, bent down to pick up the memory card from the scattered belongings, turning it over between his fingers as though it were a trinket, then slipped it into his vest pocket. She tried to shout that she had found the antidote, that Lena could still be saved, but they gave her no chance. Frank's command was curt. Lock her in the wine cellar. No one is to know. She was dragged through the dark, down the familiar corridors, into the old basement that once stored French wine, but now felt like a stone tomb, cold, airless, unforgiving. The iron door clanged shut behind her, the bolt sliding into place like the final sentence of a death warrant. She sank to the floor, breath ragged, wrists bruised, throat dry, yet her eyes still burned with fire. She had known Frank was watching her, but not that he would move this swiftly. He asked no questions, sought no confirmation, he only erased threats. She was a witness, the sole person who knew the truth about the poison, the one who had dared touch Grant Palermo's safe. But Frank didn't know the memory card in his pocket wasn't the only copy. She had hidden another, sewn into the lining at the bottom of her bag, wrapped in a thin scrap of gray cloth that looked like nothing more than trash. And only she knew it was there. Anna leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. In her mind rose the image of Lena, of Grant's terrified face, of the moment she crossed the gates carrying hope. Now all of it was trapped within these four walls of cold stone, but her resolve had not died. If she was alive, there was still a chance, and if there was a chance, she would find a way to get the antidote to where it belonged, no matter the cost. Even if she had to stand against the merciless empire she once served, even if she faced men stronger, richer, and more dangerous than she could imagine, she was no longer an invisible servant. She was a witness, a the fear, and the last flicker of light inside a mansion slowly drowning in darkness. 36 hours after being locked in the wine cellar, Anna was dragged up from the darkness like a forgotten possession. Her body was limp from cold, Heinen, hunger, and the long hours of stale air and rotting wood. 2 guards escorted her down the hallway she used to scrub every morning, but this time the floor no longer gleamed, and her steps were no longer invisible. They led her into the Palermo family's private conference room, a place reserved only for the most urgent matters. Inside, Grant sat at the head of the long table, his chin resting on his hand, dark circles etched deep beneath sleepless eyes. Behind him stood Dr. Paul Harwood, clutching a medical file. Lena was still in a coma, no progress, no sign of recovery. Anna entered with her wrists cuffed, hair tangled, clothes wrinkled, eyes swollen from exhaustion. Yet her gaze was steady. Frank sat to Grant's right, his posture polished, one hand resting casually on a sleek leather briefcase, as though this were merely another business meeting. He rose and began to speak in a calm, measured tone that carried the weight of a verdict. He told them Anna had been caught stealing money from Grant's safe, that she had fled while Lena's life hung by a thread, taking a large sum and disappearing without explanation. He produced a security video carefully edited to show her leaving Grant's office at midnight with a travel bag in hand. He said she had attempted to sell internal family information to a chemical syndicate in Arizona, that he himself had tracked her and had her detained before she could escape the danger zone. Frank went on to add that when she was captured, her bag contained a device with confidential data that could expose the family's business ties and distribution networks. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Even Dr. Paul looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Grant said nothing. His silence filled the room like smoke, suffocating and final. Anna knew she had to speak, had to now. She lifted her head, her voice hoarse but steady. She told them everything from the strange smell in Lena's food, to the cold gleam in Frank's eyes, to the dossier she had found in his office. She spoke of her journey across half the country in search of the antidote, how she had impersonated one of Frank's own to retrieve the formula, and finally, that it was Frank who had orchestrated the poisoning. The room remained silent. Frank smiled faintly. He said Anna was delusional, that no one could corroborate her story. Then he walked to the center of the room and withdrew from his briefcase an envelope containing a document, a fabricated agreement bearing Anna's forged signature, implying she had sold family secrets for cash. Her fingerprints were on it. Only then did she understand, when they dragged her in at the gate. Amid the struggle, he had forced her hand onto that paper. She had no proof left. The original USB was gone. The backup memory card sewn into her bag had been confiscated. She had no one to stand for her. Grant stared at her for a long time, then motioned to the guards. Without a word, they led her away. Frank didn't need to speak. He knew she would be judged in secret within 24 hours. In their world, betrayal meant execution, truth or not. Anna walked out of that room, heavy-footed yet with her head held high. She did not fear death. She only feared that Lena might never wake, and that Frank would continue unchecked. But there was one thing Frank didn't know. Anna had whispered a few words to the only person in the room who didn't sit at the table, the young guard by the door. A name, an address, and a quiet instruction: if I don't come back, find this place. The boy had nodded slightly, saying nothing, but his eyes said everything. The game was not over, and Anna had not spoken her last word. Anna was returned to the old cellar, the stone walls now pressing on her breath as if the house itself sought to silence her. And she knew time was running out. In the Palermo world, a death sentence needed no court, no lawyer, merely the nod of the man at the head of the table. And Grant had not uttered a word. Yet though the door had closed, she had not surrendered, because she had sown a small seed at the right moment with the right person. The young guard whose face still held boyishness, and whose eyes looked at her differently from the others, free of contempt and the household's usual indifference. His name was Tommy, and he had joined Palermo Security a few months earlier, assigned to the shifts no one wanted, the quiet nights, and Anna had often left him a cup of coffee with a little milk, knowing he could not stomach bitterness. He had never been talkative, but she had learned he heard everything. Whispers, the odd footsteps at midnight, fragments of conversations no one thought anyone was listening to. And that night when Tommy came on duty and stood watch at the cellar door, she spoke without pleading or tears. Simply a small voice through the iron slot calling his name. And though he did not answer aloud, she was sure he stood there. So she told him everything, from Lena's collapse to the strange smell in the girl's meal. From the dossier she found in Frank's office to the long journey to Arizona, where she had risked her life to fetch the antidote formula. Speaking slowly, enunciating each word not to convince but to make him understand. Telling him she did not ask him to pick the lock or risk himself to help her escape. She needed only one thing: to get the backup memory card into Dr. Harwood's hands, sewn into the lining at the very bottom of her bag, because she dared not hide it in her handbag where it would be searched. And she trusted Tommy because he was the only soul in that house who still felt a proper fear. Not cowardice, but the dread reserved for what is wrong. And after a long silence, his voice came, trembling but clear: if I do this, they will kill me. And Anna did not lie when she nodded and said she knew. But if he did not act, the child would die, and everything would be buried as if it had never happened, and Frank would carry on, and one day it might be his mother or his sister or someone he loved. And Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he tapped twice on the iron frame, signaling her to turn her face away, and she obeyed like a child. And a little while later she heard the lock click and felt a hand slide through the gap, brushing the hem of the fabric beneath her clothes. And he had it, the scrap of memory card no larger than a fingernail wrapped in thin tape, warm from her body, which he took without a word and walked away, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Anna slumped on the cold stone floor, not knowing if he would keep his promise, not knowing whether Harwood would have the courage to face Frank, not knowing whether Grant would hear the truth or continue to look away. But she had done everything she could, entrusted hope to a young guard not yet swallowed by the house's darkness, because sometimes change does not begin with the most powerful but with the watchman, with a tiny scrap of memory and the courage to choose. And that choice can alter fate. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the tall second-floor windows of the Palermo mansion, laying a soft gleam across the pale, the motionless face of the little girl who had not stirred for days. Lena had not yet opened her eyes, but something had changed the rhythm of her breathing, the faint steadiness in her pulse, the slight curl of her tiny fingers, as if her body were trying to remember how to live. Dr. Harwood had not left her side all night. Before him sat a small, unlabeled vial delivered in a sealed envelope by a young guard named Tommy. Inside was a handwritten note detailing dosage, timing, and a warning. The reaction would be severe within the first 20 minutes. Paul did not know whom to trust, nor whether to administer an untested medicine. But when he saw the familiar signature at the bottom, a scientist whose name he recognized from his early medical studies, he knew it was real. And the person who had brought it back was none other than the housemaid locked in the cellar, awaiting a death sentence. Paul followed the instructions. He injected the first dose into Lena's vein at 6:18 a.m. By 6:37, her pupils began to react. At 6:40, her heartbeat stabilized. At 7 o'clock, a faint groan escaped her lips and her eyelids fluttered. By 7:12, for the first time in 7 days, Lena Palermo opened her eyes. Her breath came in sharp, frightened gasps. But she saw Dr. Harwood's weary, tearful face above her and gripped his hand. He said nothing, only nodded, tears slipping down his lined cheeks. The news spread through the mansion like a silent explosion. Guards whispered. Kitchen staff froze. The old nurse wept openly, yet no one dared to tell Grant Palermo. He sat alone in his study, staring at a cup of cold coffee, haunted by doubt and the crushing silence he had allowed to consume him. Then Paul entered. He did not knock, did not greet. He simply placed a photograph on the desk. Lena, eyes open, a faint smile trembling on her lips, like someone who had just returned from death. Grant took the picture, his fingers trembling. Paul said nothing more. He opened his briefcase, removed a duplicate of the antidote instructions and an old scrap of paper wrapping the memory card, bearing Anna's handwriting. If I don't make it back, use this. And trust me, Dr. Harwood straightened. His fear gone, he told everything: how Anna had traced the toxin, uncovered Frank's involvement, risked everything to bring back the cure, how she alone had refused to give up on Lena while everyone else in the house clung to lies crafted too perfectly. Grant did not respond. He closed his eyes, and memories surged the day Anna first arrived in her worn uniform, head bowed yet hands always clean. The way she tucked Lena's blanket with quiet care, how she slipped away when he lost his temper, how she wiped away blood without asking a question. And that night he saw her weeping behind the stone wall as Lena burned with fever. Grant rose. He did not look at Paul or speak a word. He simply walked out, striding toward the basement. The iron door had been shut far too long, but now it was time to open it, not out of pity, but because he knew he had been wrong. And the woman waiting behind that door was no mere servant. She was the one who had saved the last beating heart left within him. The cellar door burst open, flooding the damp, airless room with blinding light. And from that brilliance stepped a figure Anna knew too well: tall, silent, carved from the same cold stone as the house itself. Grant Palermo. He came without guards, without a gun, carrying only the weight of his gaze, which met hers as though it could speak all the words that had never been said. He did not apologize, but when he extended his hand, she understood without a single word. For the first time since she had set foot inside the Palermo mansion, she was no longer standing on the margins. She placed her trembling hand in his and rose, walking beside him slowly, deliberately, up the stone steps into the light. When they appeared in the main corridor, everyone stopped: guards, maids, cooks, their faces a mix of disbelief and fear. No one spoke, but they all knew something irreversible had shifted. Grant said nothing. He merely gestured. A meeting was called at once in the grand conference room where Frank was already seated, his expression composed, confident, like a man savoring victory after a long game of chess. When he saw Anna walking in beside Grant, his eyes flickered, the smallest fracture in his calm. But he recovered quickly, offering a thin smile as he rose to speak. Grant lifted a hand, silencing him. He pulled out a chair for Anna, then turned toward Frank. I want to hear the entire story from the beginning. Frank nodded and began his well-rehearsed performance, reciting the same lies, smooth and practiced, bolstered by forged documents and doctored footage. But this time, he didn't know that Grant already knew everything. When Frank finished, Anna reached into her pocket and drew out a memory card, the last copy she had kept. Dr. Harwood stepped forward, inserted it into the computer, and projected the data onto the large screen, line by line. The truth unfolded: chemical formulas, lab notes bearing Frank's handwriting, security schematics, Purchase orders for toxic compounds shipped from Arizona, all bearing one name as recipient, Frank Marzano. The room fell silent. Frank froze, but tried to rally, shouting that it was fake, that she had forged everything, that she was insane. Grant said nothing. His eyes hardened. He signaled. Tommy entered, carrying a sealed pouch, the original USB drive recovered from Frank's office, hidden behind the bookshelf. When it was opened, the data matched perfectly. The evidence was irrefutable. Yet what truly condemned Frank was not the files, it was the voice that came from the doorway behind him. Lena, the little girl, pale but awake, supported by Dr. Botter, Paul, her eyes bright with fragile fire. Her voice trembled but was clear. I heard you. In the kitchen. You said it had to be done before the medicine cooled. The air in the room turned to glass. Frank spun around, face drained of color. He backed away, but the guards had already blocked the exit. He thrashed, cursed, denied, but Grant didn't need to hear another word. Enough, he said quietly. Take him away. The guards seized him, dragging him down the same marble corridor he had once ruled. Now stripped of his power, his dignity, his name each echoing footstep a toll of final judgment, Anna stood still. She did not cry. She looked at Grant. He didn't thank her with words. Instead, he stepped forward, faced her, and bowed his head. A true beau. Before everyone, before the woman no one had ever noticed who had done what none of them had the courage to do. And from that moment on, her place in the Palermo house was changed forever. She was no longer the servant in the shadows. She was the one who had restored justice. Quietly, irrevocably, and in her silence, the entire house had been forced to remember what humanity looked like. Frank was held alone in the security room on the lowest level of the mansion, the chamber that had once been used to interrogate traitorous rivals of the Palermo clan, and its four walls were clad in thick steel, windowless and dead to any signal, with only a single iron chair and a yellow bulb dangling from the ceiling to pick out the face that had finally lost its customary composure. He sat there, his hands locked to the chair's arms, shirt rumpled, sweat slicking his temples, knowing that with the revelations now exposed he had no path back. Yet what unnerved him most was not the exposure, but the fact that Grant had not demanded his immediate end, a silence more terrifying than any sentence. For Grant Palermo was notorious for not prolonging the agony of a betrayer, and still, that day Grant remained silent. The following afternoon Grant himself entered the cell alone, unarmed and without bodyguards, accompanied only by Anna standing quietly at his side with a gaze colder than a scalpel. And Frank sneered at their arrival, leaning back and feigning calm. "I suppose you came for a last confession," he said. But Grant did not reply. He sat opposite, placed a thick file on the table, the very material Anna had uncovered and handed to Paul. The extracts from devices that thought themselves mute, undeniable proof. He spoke slowly, and never raising his voice, asking only one question: why? Frank fell silent for a moment, then laughed thinly, claiming he had built the empire from nothing with Grant, that he brought the first contracts to the table, that he had courted distributors in the dark and dealt with traitors before they could speak. And now, after all his work, everything came down to a little girl and a housemaid. He confessed he had poisoned Lena because he believed Grant would never restore his place to him, that no matter his deeds, Grant preferred to hand power to the child who did not know negotiation, the underworld, life and death. So he removed the single obstacle Anna framed her as traitor. And when Lena died, Grant would be broken, and he would hold everything together. It was not for family, but for power. He snarled, because he had lived too long in Grant's shadow, and his admission landed like a blade across the table. Still, Grant did not lash out. He rose and moved to the door, then turned to meet Frank's eyes and spoke in words weighed with intent. A family cannot be built on the blood of a betrayer, and power cannot be granted to one who proves his worth with poison. He signaled, and 2 guards entered to unshackle Frank, binding his hands with coarse rope as the man railed and begged, "What will you do? Grant? Shoot me? Execute me?" You want me gone quietly so you won't lose face?" But no answer came. Frank was led out through a side gate, pushed into an armored SUV, and driven straight to the northern border, where Palermo territory met the land controlled by a rival clan. An old enemy, there were no farewells. And no mercy. Only a single note handed to those who would take him. "Dispose of the traitor by your own methods." They shoved him through the iron gate, and no one caught his fall. His silhouette vanished into the cold mist of the place he once declared forbidden. And that was the sentence no blood needed. Merely the stripping away of a place to return. And in the Mafia world that loss can be more fearsome than death. After Frank's exile, the Palermo mansion fell into a long, heavy silence, as if everyone were waiting for another storm to arrive. Yet what came instead was an almost imperceptible transformation, beginning with the one man no one believed could ever change Grant Palermo. The midnight meetings stopped. The unrecorded contracts ended. The shipments that once left under the names of shell companies disappeared. Grant began with a private gathering of his financial and legal advisors, joined by an outside auditing firm, where he announced the end of every operation tied to smuggling and arms trade, the empire's lifeblood for more than 30 years. In their place, he unveiled a plan to convert all family assets and cash flow into legitimate ventures, real estate, medical technology, and investments in neglected residential infrastructure. The decision sent shockwaves through his circle. Several longtime confidants rebelled, calling it surrender, the loss of profit and power. But Grant did not give them the chance to become another Frank. He dismissed them outright and terminated every hidden profit-sharing agreement of the past. To those who remained loyal, he spoke plainly. "We cannot keep living in the dark. My daughter nearly died because of my silence. I will not let that happen again." He reinstated Dr. Paul Harwood as medical director of a newly formed charity, the Lina Palermo Foundation, dedicated to the study of toxins, antidotes, and the care of children affected by organized crime. Lina's name was no longer just the family's, it became a symbol of another path, one where darkness would finally yield to light. Anna was entrusted with overseeing the family's financial transition. No one objected, because everyone knew that without her, Lina would not have survived. And without her records, the underground network might have collapsed or fallen into enemy hands. Grant then held a public assembly, the first ever in Palermo history, inviting journalists, investors, and local authorities into the mansion. There, he opened the family ledgers, revealed the restructuring, and pledged full cooperation with law enforcement to address past violations. Before witnesses, he signed documents dissolving 3 front companies and transferred several illicit properties to community organizations. He admitted his mistakes, saying the family's wealth had been built on pain and fear, but insisted that no one is condemned forever if they have the courage to change. The announcement made national news. Few could believe that the head of one of America's most infamous dynasties had chosen to abandon his empire and begin again. But deep inside, Grant knew this was not redemption, it was release. For the first time in decades, he felt the weight of power, blood, and deceit lift from his chest. Lina was recovering day by day. Anna was no longer the invisible maid, but the person he trusted most. And Grant had begun to see himself not as a Don, but as a father, a man who could leave his child something greater than fortune or vengeance. From those first quiet steps, Grant Palermo began to rewrite his family's history not with bullets, but with truth, not through intimidation, but through responsibility, not by dominance, but by choice. And for the first time in his life, he believed his daughter would grow up in a home where no more bodies lay hidden behind cold stone walls. 3 weeks after the public announcement that redefined the Palermo legacy, on a morning quieter than most, Grant called Anna to his private office. The room that had once hosted covert deals and dangerous contracts was now transformed, lined with bookshelves, financial records, and sunlight pouring through a wide window overlooking the garden where Lina often played. Grant sat behind his desk, no longer the image of a powerful Don, but that of a father who had weathered a storm and survived. He gestured for Anna to sit. In front of him rested a small black box placed neatly at the center of the table. There were no preambles, no speeches. His gaze was steady, serious but not stern, as he told her he wanted to entrust her with a new role, the full management of Lena's personal finances, including the investment fund in her name, all income-generating assets, and oversight of the Lena Palermo Foundation's disbursements. For a moment, Anna could not speak. The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. She had been a maid, a suspect, a prisoner who had once looked death in the eye, and now the man who had ruled an empire of shadows was handing her the keys to his daughter's financial future. Grant read the disbelief in her eyes, but his voice was calm and unwavering as he explained that trust was not given because of status or birth, but because of action, when everyone else had turned away. She had walked straight into danger not for herself, but for a child who shared no blood with her, a person capable of that, he said, would never let money or power corrupt her sense of right and wrong. He pushed the box toward her. Inside lay a new safe key, a digital access card to the family's financial system, and a small leather notebook filled with handwritten account information. All were in Lena's name, with Anna listed as co-controller. She didn't speak. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, not of fear, nor pain, but of something far deeper. The quiet astonishment of being seen, truly seen. For the first time in her life, she was no longer the servant in the background, is no longer invisible. She had been entrusted with something more precious than wealth, the future of a child and the faith of a father who had lost almost everything. From that day on, Anna began her new role as she had lived her life quietly, without fanfare. She did not change her clothes or her habits, still wearing her old wool sweater and tying her hair neatly at the back. Yet now she sat in meetings with investment advisors, spoke with bankers, and signed off on scholarship grants for homeless children in Lena's name. She reviewed every expense, every line of profit, not for gain, but as a duty to Lena, to Grant, and to all those who had once believed that someone like her could never do something great. Lena often joined her after school, books in hand, sometimes asking curious, innocent questions about numbers, banks, and why adults needed so much money. Anna answered patiently, one concept at a time, planting in the girl's mind the earliest seeds of financial understanding, of ethics, and of responsibility for what one possesses. To Anna, the new title was not a reward. It was an obligation, and to Grant, the decision was more than a transfer of authority. It was the ultimate symbol of transformation, the act of placing faith in the most fragile yet steadfast thing he had ever known, a woman the world had overlooked, who had stood unshaken when everything else fell apart. From that moment, Anna was no longer just the guardian of Lena's assets. She became the keeper of an entire family's reborn legacy, a legacy now written not in fear or silence, but in trust and quiet strength. When Anna had still been a maid, every step she took down the marble corridors of the Palermo mansion left no sound, no trace. People were used to her silence the way she stood one step back, avoided their eyes, and nodded politely without anyone bothering to nod in return. To them, she was merely a shadow, part of the furniture in a perfectly oiled, arrogant machine. But after everything that had happened, after she had not only saved Lena's life but had also become the family's personal financial overseer, things began to shift, starting from the smallest, quietest details. For the first time, the cook poured her an extra cup of coffee each morning, not in the old chipped mug but in the porcelain cup reserved for guests. One of the guards who used to ignore her now gave a small nod when she passed. Even the head housekeeper, the same woman who once scolded her for folding towels in the wrong order, quietly set a place for her at the breakfast table among the senior staff, as if she truly belonged there. At first, those gestures left Anna unsettled. She was not used to attention, nor to being treated as someone who mattered. But gradually she learned to accept the change, not as privilege but as part of a journey she herself never expected to take. Without her asking, her name began to appear on the weekly meeting list. People sought her opinion when the foundation needed new medical equipment or when the family was considering an investor for a housing project in the Bronx. In those meetings, Anna spoke little. She listened, took careful notes, and when she finally did speak, it was brief, measured, and precise. Her words carried weight not because of the title Grant had given her, but because everyone in that room had witnessed what she had dared to do when the rest of them remained silent. Lena was closer to Anna than ever. She no longer called her the maid. When introducing her to friends or doctors, Lena spoke firmly. "This is my family." Sometimes Anna would sit beside her while the girl drew pictures. In them, there was always a house with 3 figures beneath one roof: Lena, Grant, and Anna standing together without fences or locked doors. Once Lena asked, "If I had 2 mothers, would that be okay?" Anna laughed, saying nothing, but warmth spread through her chest in a way she had never known before. That bond had no label, no need for one. It existed in every touch, every glance filled with quiet trust. In the evenings, when Anna worked in the small financial office, staff members would sometimes drop by just to ask if she needed anything, or they would set a cup of tea beside her desk the way family does without being asked. No one whispered behind her back anymore. The murmurs of "the maid who climbed too high" were gone. Now, if a new employee mistakenly referred to her as the former housemaid, someone would immediately correct them. "She's family." That recognition did not come from a formal ceremony or an official decree. It came from small, repeated acts, layered gently over time like rain seeping through stone. Anna had not forced her way into the Palermo household. She had quietly become part of it, saturating its cold corners with steadiness and sincerity. And Grant understood, without ever saying it aloud, that no one could replace her, not because she had saved his daughter's life, but because she was the only one brave enough to keep the family from being swallowed by the shadow it had once created. Anna had not been born to belong in this house. Yet somehow, this house had chosen her, and they no longer called her an outsider. They called her by the one word once reserved for blood: family. A few weeks after Anna had officially been entrusted with the financial guardianship of Lena and had quietly become an indispensable part of the Palermo family's new order, Grant performed a small, private act, one that only those who understood the true weight of trust could fully appreciate. One quiet afternoon, as the sun cast its golden hue across the western wall of the mansion, he summoned Anna to his study. There were no papers to sign, no reports to review. On the desk sat a small black steel safe, the same high-security model he had always used to keep his most confidential files, his most precious portable assets, and, at times, the old photographs that no one but he had ever seen. He gestured for Anna to come closer and pointed to the electronic keypad blinking, ready for a new code to be set. Without a wordy explanation, he handed her a folded piece of paper. When Anna opened it, she found only 4 capital letters: A-N-N-A. She looked up at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. Grant spoke slowly, each word sounding like a seal being broken from a heart long accustomed to silence and control. "I once set the code to Lena's birthday because I believed nothing mattered more than my daughter. But after everything that has happened, without you, Lena wouldn't be alive. And without you, I wouldn't be the father I am today. I have Ka." Anna didn't answer right away. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at those familiar letters she had never imagined would become the key to something so sacred. It wasn't the money or the power inside the safe that moved her. It was the realization that for the first time, Grant Palermo, a man who had trusted, no one had chosen her name as the lock that guarded what he valued most. Grant stood, pressing the keypad slowly. A-N-N-A. A soft beep echoed through the room like the beat of a heart unlocking. The door clicked open, revealing not stacks of cash or papers of wealth, but a worn gold chain, a wax-sealed envelope, and a faded photograph of Grant and his late wife. Taken long before Lena was born, Grant offered no explanation. He simply looked at Anna and said quietly, "From now on, if anything ever happens to me, you'll know what to do." And so, the words carried no sense of warning, only trust, a silent passing of guardianship, deeper than any contract. Anna nodded, saying nothing. There was no need for gratitude between them. She understood that this moment marked the final turning point, the full transfer of faith, not through promises, but through action. That night, back in her room. Anna opened her drawer and placed the small paper bearing her 4 letters beside a drawing Lena had once given her. The 3 of them, Lena, Grant, and Anna, sitting together beneath a blue-roofed home. She needed no other title. It was enough to know that in a world once cold and built on suspicion, there now existed a place that considered her name something worth protecting, not only in a father's heart, but within the very soul of a family she had once only watched from the shadows. And now, her name had become the code to the family's deepest trust, something no one could ever take from her again. One late autumn evening, when the Palermo mansion was wrapped in a veil of mist, and the wind whispered softly through the rows of maples shedding their leaves, Anna stepped into Grant's study after putting Lena to sleep. The room was still lit, the tea before Grant, steaming faintly. But he wasn't reading the newspaper or reviewing ledgers as he usually did. He was looking out the window, toward the small garden slowly dissolving into darkness. Anna sat quietly across from him. They no longer needed to speak with formality. The silence between them was no longer distance, it was understanding. A pause thick with meaning, as if both were waiting for the right moment to say what had long needed to be said. Today, Lena asked me a difficult question, Anna said softly, her voice steady and low. She asked what she would inherit if one day her father was no longer here. It sighed. Grant didn't turn immediately, but Anna knew he was listening. "And what did you tell her?" he asked, his tone calm, almost emotionless. "I told her that wealth isn't what matters most," Anna replied. "I said, what matters is what her father leaves inside her heart, in the way she lives, and in the way she treats others." I was just enraged. Grant exhaled slowly, then turned to face her. His eyes were heavy with sorrow. "I used to think leaving her millions of dollars, a network of influence, and this entire empire would be enough. But I've realized a name can inspire fear, but it cannot teach character. A mansion can shelter from the cold, but it can't teach a person the difference between right and wrong." "Itanza," Anna nodded, her gaze softening. "I know," she said quietly, "and I think it's time you rewrite what legacy really means. Not through deeds or titles, through people." "Itanza." Grant studied her for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer and placed a folder on the table. "This is the draft I've prepared for Lena," he said. "It's a trust not just to secure her financially, but with conditions. To access the funds, she must complete her education, dedicate at least 2 years to community service, and create something of her own that benefits others. She can never use the money to control or to retaliate, only to build and to heal." Iaphraisis, a smile curved gently on Anna's lips. It was exactly what she had hoped for, not to control Lena, but to protect the girl's soul from the same slope her father once slid down. Yet she wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said. Grant lifted his eyes. "Waiting. I want you to add one more name to the will," she said after a pause. "Not to share the inheritance, but to honor it. Lena's mother's name, even though she's been gone for years. Lena deserves to know her mother existed, that she was loved, and that she is still part of her father's heart. Does not Rection." Grant fell silent. His shoulders trembled slightly. He had never spoken about his late wife. Her death had been the moment that turned him cold, that made him seal himself inside the armor he'd worn for decades. But when Anna spoke her name, there was no pity, no pressure, only gentleness. And he knew, then, that it was time to open that door again. "I will," he whispered, his voice like the faint rustle of wind through leaves. Then, almost instinctively, Grant reached for the teapot and poured more tea into Anna's cup, a simple gesture, yet filled with quiet respect. In that still night, they sat side by side, 2 people from different worlds, now united by a single purpose, to leave Lena not merely an inheritance, but a life she could walk through with her head held high, a life where kindness, courage, and loyalty would never lose their worth. And the truest legacy, they both knew, was not locked inside any safe. It lived in the hearts of those healed by love and trust. 1 year later, Lena had made a full recovery. She ran freely through the Palermo garden. Ere long, soft hair streaming in the autumn breeze, her laughter echoing across the white stone paths. No one would have recognized the girl who had once lain silent between life and death. Yet no one could forget that the one who had pulled her back from that fragile edge was Anna, the woman who had once seemed to enter this family only to cook and clean. Now, Anna was no longer the figure standing behind the kitchen door. She was the one seated beside Grant Palermo at the round table during the family's most important meetings. She needed no weapon, no grand title, only honesty, courage, and trust to guard an empire in the midst of transformation. The new investment funds under Lena's name were run with clear principles: transparency, compassion, and sustainability. Every dollar of profit was reinvested into the community, into scholarships for children, into rehabilitation centers for victims of poison and violence. Anna oversaw everything with the same meticulous care she once used to fold a tablecloth, only now what she preserved was not material but moral integrity. Grant Palermo had changed as well. Once a man ruled by power and fear, he had become a father who listened, who knew how to step aside and let the next generation stand in the light. And above all, a man who had learned to bow before kindness. Can an empire be rebuilt on forgiveness? This story is the answer. No life exists without mistakes, no power without fractures, but when a person chooses to stop, to make amends, to place their trust in the right hands, even the darkest past can be healed. And in the underworld once filled with blood and silence, it was an ordinary woman without noble birth, without academic titles, who became the symbol of a new chapter, one defined by faith, compassion, and a living legacy rewritten in decency. The story of Anna and Lena is not merely a family's tale. It is the story of a choice between revenge and forgiveness, between power and humanity, between silence and action. And the beautiful truth is this: any one of us can be an Anna, if we dare to stand up for what is right, even just once. If this story has moved you, please subscribe, like, and share the YouTube channel Underworld Love Stories to hear more heartfelt stories every day. We would love to read your reflections, your honest thoughts, your memories, the feelings this story may have awakened in you. What touched your heart? What made you pause and think? Leave a comment below, because sometimes a single shared word can soothe a hurting soul somewhere in the world. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. We wish you good health, peace, and days filled with love and wholeness. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.